I will carry us on to the next topic, which is the Chicago Bears, who are 11-4. They're first place in the NFC North. They're playing the 49ers tonight in an NFC showdown, a potential playoff, preview for those two teams. And like I mentioned, the Bears are in first place in their division this season, and it's been the most successful season this franchise has had in decades, honestly, when you scope out. They're ahead of the Packers, who are 9-6-1. The Vikings and Lions are in third and fourth place at 8-8. The Lions just had an embarrassing loss and look lost without Ben Johnson. The Packers, they have these injury problems every year with their quarterback and at critical positions like wide receiver and edge. And the fan base is growing frustrated with Matt Lafleur. And now, here we are in 2025, the Bears, in their first year with Ben Johnson, are the best team in the NFC North. And they're looking to do some serious damage as contenders in the AFC. That is sort of top-heavy, I'd say, with the Seahawks and the Rams. And overall, I'm not looking as much here about what's going to happen into the playoffs. It's just what this Ryan Poles and Ben Johnson, course of decisions over the offseason and how they've found solutions for Caleb Williams with the offensive line and been able to develop him, and how much of a success it is, and how I'm actually more confident that they're going to stick around than the pairings of Jordan Love and Matt Lafleur and Jared Goff and Dan Campbell. This is year one of this team, and they're not slipping up, and they're playing really smart, and that's why they're getting lucky, and they're winning these really close games. One of the biggest questions heading into this year was Caleb Williams, and he's playing like an absolute superstar. And it seems like the whole team is bought in. The defense is forcing turnovers, even though they're not like a massive strength. They're doing that really well. And
they lead the league.
They lead the league in turnovers, and that's if that's all you're getting, that's all you need to ask for as an offense.
You know what's funny about that?
What?
I think they took Dallas' secondary coach Al Harris. This is his first year in Chicago, and they lead the league in turnovers.
Yeah,
he's the guy that made Trayvon Diggs great, and like those Cowboys defenses with Dan Quinn.
Yeah,
he was part of it, and we let him walk out the door. He was a Mike McCarthy coach, so that's another thing. If you guys hire McCarthy, you could see a world where he's your defensive coordinator.
I'm not going to entertain that, but I do want to say how this Bears team reminds me a lot of, mostly because of their defense, the Falcons team that went to the Super Bowl when they had Dan Quinn as their coach. And their defense was predicated on forcing the most turnovers in the league, and they had this very explosive, versatile offense. And it feels very similar to this Bears team, and like how you said with the Cowboys and, how they were structured, which, it does kind of make this, Bears team seem like, their weakness could be that they're a little flimsy on defense. And we'll see and check in throughout the pod to see how they're going against this 49ers team. That should be a real challenge for their defense. But overall, I just feel like I said it earlier this year when I brought it up, and I finally bought into this Bears team. But I really do feel like this coach.
What's that? Usual. Couple months behind.
Well, I wanted to see it, and I mean, there's still reasons to be hesitant, but this is what I do feel like I do know, and that's that Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams is the best coach-quarterback pairing in the NFL outside of Andy Reid and Stafford McVay, who's knocking on the door of retirement. Even though he's only 37 years old, we've heard these rumors about Matthew Stafford, and that would leave Caleb Williams and Ben Johnson as the elite coach-quarterback pairing in the NFC, presumably to dominate the NFC playoffs for the foreseeable future.
How did you fail to mention Hurts and Nick Sirianni?
No, get out of here with those two. No. Howie Roseman is the wizard in Philadelphia who's pulling all of this off. But
we know how he's doing it.
Yeah,
me and you know.
Yeah, but anyway, the bottom line is that this Bears team, I feel really good about them holding firmly onto this NFC North. They may not win it next year, but they'll definitely be in the playoffs. And I don't know if they're going to be able to beat the Rams or Seahawks this year in the playoffs, but I do know that I think pretty confidently that they will be a threat in the divisional round. They will have a chance to get there. And if this Rams-Seahawks team runs into each other, I see no reason this Bears team can't make the NFC Championship to face off against one of them. So, Joey, I just am wondering, what is your outlook on the NFC North and the Bears beyond this season, outside of what they might do in the playoffs?
Just talk about the Bears first. You talked about comparing them to the Falcons. To me, this is like the Cowboys. Like I feel like they have the same build and like the same kind of hype going into the postseason. So it could be like a one and done scenario. Like they're a young team, but they have like the three playmakers on offense, and then Caleb Williams and what he can do running is what changes these games. But for me, I'm just more disappointed. Number one, the Packers, how much they failed to meet expectations this year.
Yeah.
You can blame the Micah injury, but it was before that they were, floundering for most of the season. I'd say, just look lost. And when you really lock into the Packers, it's really like you could tell all Lafleur cares about is his offense. So the defense is always a step behind, it seems like, and they're one of the sloppiest teams in football when it comes to penalties and like just dumb mistakes. They got to lead the league and shit like that. But and that to me, that goes to your head coach, and that's kind of what I'm pointing to is how invested he is in this offense. It just has the rest of the team fail in my eyes.
Yeah, I will say I do think during that Broncos game and leading up before that, kind of around Thanksgiving Toyotathon, as we know, the Packers to me felt like they were heating up and finally starting to actually fire on all cylinders. And then after 3 quarters against the Broncos, everything fell apart. After the Micah Parsons injury is really the way I did see, is that they were completely demoralized. They also lost Jordan Love. I mean, they don't have him right now. And I think it's a problem.
Malik Willis looks better.
I'm not going to say better. Malik Willis is a great backup, and it's great that
he
they
looks
have
way
him.
better than Jordan Love does. And he actually adds you the run game part of it too, which is scary. And this all brings me to the Titans and how much they fumbled the team that they had with Vrabel, and then how they had Malik Willis there. And they had Derrick Henry, they had A.J. Brown, and it all just fell apart. Well, besides him, they had Malik Willis in-house. They just couldn't develop him. And now look at him with Lafleur in Green Bay. He looks like a starting quarterback.
He does. No, he looks really good. I think, if the Raiders didn't have the first pick, they'd be a team that could look at him. The Jets.
This is your Joe Milton. This is how you're looking at Joe Milton.
This is a Joe Milton situation. That's right. But yeah, in terms of the Packers, no, you're right. Overall, about the season and not meeting expectations, absolutely. Last year, I think it was kind of fair to look at the wide receiver situation, how well they played against the Super Bowl champions in the first round, and say this is a contending team, especially with the addition of Micah Parsons. Now they had a rocky start, like you said. I think they were heating up, but regardless, it's clear that they're declining and not going to meet their expectations this year. If this team did anything substantial in the playoffs beyond win a wild card game, I would be pretty shocked. I think they're destined to fall in the divisional round for the most likely. And even though they, like I said, they're going to make the playoffs, it's just not going to be great for them. But what I would like to bring up a team that I feel is more deserving of criticism along these lines.
Before we move on, I just want to add one more thing.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what you, me, and Matthew Golden all have in common?
We have 0 touchdowns in the NFL.
We have the same amount of touchdowns in the NFL.
Yeah.
First round pick.
Yeah, I mean, you want to look at Matt Lafleur for that one and say, you probably wanted this guy. You would think you'd try to use him, beyond the, you had no Christian Watson early. I get he's a 21-year-old rookie, but if you take him in the first round, he's got to be ready on some level. They're one of the youngest. Huh?
I have multiple things for you.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about the draft now, I wanted to add, I feel like no coach should have any kind of say in who your GM drafts. I feel like it should be like a cutoff, like a hard cutoff. I feel like a lot of the issues we see are like these, because you got to understand which coaches can actually scout and understand talent and which coaches can't. Because we see a lot of, and more likely than not, these coaches can't evaluate the talent from college. Because I feel like we see a lot. That's how these busts come, and I feel like that's for Matthew Golden. Like I feel like I was surprised he got drafted where he did. I didn't see him as the best receiver in the draft. And then for him to get picked to where he was, you have to believe your head coach, who's your offensive coordinator, is the guy pounding the table for him, and then to have a whole season with them, and this is what it looks like. That's another strike to me for Lafleur. And talking about Lafleur and all that, like we already acknowledged that the NFL didn't have the 7-seed playoff format. Lafleur would have never made the playoffs in any year without Aaron Rodgers as his quarterback. I feel like that's pretty important. But and then to add on to that, we considered them a playoff team before the Micah Parsons trade and all that. So really, how much does that? I get how good he is, but like, how much can that really impact your team? Like, you shouldn't collapse because of his injuries. How I feel about it.
Well, no, you shouldn't collapse because of the injury. But like I said, they lost Watson in that game. They lost Micah. No, they shouldn't have collapsed. But it's not like they collapsed for no reason. I mean, that was definitely a substantial piece of it. And I want to point out to you that the Packers general manager Brian Gutekunst is one of these sort of really, uh, these GMs who people are very critical of, the fan base of the Packers, because in years past where they've taken guys like, they had multiple first round picks. They take Quay Walker, a middle linebacker at number 22. Devontae Wyatt was good, and that was one of his better drafts where he got Christian Watson and Dobbs. But overall, he's been a very like SEC, like,
Who was the
dependent.
Iowa D?
The Iowa D end was Lucas Van Ness.
Yeah, he's
He's
been a huge bust.
I wouldn't say huge bust, but he's just not. He's not like a Leonard Williams. Even he's not like a highly productive player. Like he's
DN.
developing. He's a defensive end. Well, he's like the three tech, like the Cameron Hayward defensive end. But yeah, they do put him on the edge sometimes. But ultimately, like I will say, for Matt Lafleur, like I did also say, I'm sure he wanted him, but I'm not gonna come out and say like he told Brian Gutekunst to pick him, and that's why they did it. Like I'm sure they were either in agreement or, Gutekunst probably, he is the GM, like you said. They're usually the ones who have the most say in those decisions. But to kind of point to what you're saying about whether a head coach, yeah, it is got to be tough to have an understanding of if your coach is able to scout players.
Yeah,
Are they?
it's
Do
also
they? What's
it's
up?
also like your positional coaches too, like your defensive coordinator or your D line. Like if whatever player you're looking at, they could be in your ear about that guy and have him circled on your draft board, and that's the guy that like that's gonna be a discussion.
But
And
on
whoever
some
has more people, you know.
level though, I do think you kind of need that actually. You need your if you're a GM and you're hiring
If I'm
if
paying
you're
you to be
hiring
my
hold
GM,
on, hear me out.
go ahead.
If you're a GM and you're hiring coaches, I would hope that you're hiring coaches that you believe on some level can scout for players that are going to fit their system and are going to be able to learn. They're going to be able to pick up on character traits. Is this guy going to be a hard enough worker to learn my system? All these sorts of things. I would hope a coach can be able to relate to players on that level and understand them and be able to know what they want, know what they need as a coach. And if the GM doesn't trust them to help them say, what do we need here? What do we need on defense? I should be able to ask my defensive coordinator what he thinks the biggest weakness is and kind of compare that to my thoughts and vice versa with the offense. And if you're not getting that done, I'm not saying it's something that can't happen, but I would say I think that's a sign you're a dysfunctional GM and a
To
dysfunctional
stop you there,
organization.
I feel like I fall on the opposite of that. I mean, I'm paying you to be my GM, so if you're going to just listen to what these coaches are saying, why would I not just like why do I even employ you? You know what I'm saying?
I get
Your
it, but
job is your job is to scout the talent and then have your draft board, and you build a team around the defense that you hired to be there. You know what I'm saying? Like
yeah,
that's your
it's
position. I'm
and
not I'm not hiring these guys to be like a GM. They're my coaches. I'm not. That's my whole point. And then for me, this is a Cowboys thing. So you can point to some Cowboys drafts of recent memory. Really, the Mozzie Smith draft. That whole class was horrible. And Mozzie Smith is a Dan Quinn guy. Dan Quinn wanted them. And then I've been following Dan Quinn players and then their draft classes in DC. Washington, outside of the Jaden Daniels thing, I don't really know how to feel about that. It's been awful. Like he can't. He's had terrible drafts. And that also falls like you can have like other like coaches, D line coaches, linebacker coaches, whatever it is. They put a ring in it. You know what I'm saying? I wouldn't want my GM to be that open minded. Is what I'm getting at.
I understand what you mean about the GM doing his job, the coach doing his job, and all that. But we've got to acknowledge there's got to be some level of
I'll listen to you,
cohesiveness,
but like I don't want to hear you bang the table
right?
during the draft.
And
You have
and
to think.
then and
You
then
know,
to what to and then which we both kind of agree there, but to like what extent, like how much is it supposed to be? To me, my mindset is always that if from a team standpoint you want everyone to have one mindset, to have one goal, win a Super Bowl. I'm the guard. I've got to execute at a high level at all my guard assignments all year, all the way through the offense, the defense, and then that goes through the coaches. That should also run through the organization. And I feel like ideally, this isn't going to always happen, but ideally, from either owner or GM all the way down to, the long snapper and, the fourth string offensive tackle, everyone should be bought into the same mindset. And on some level, they should kind of all know what the team needs, but it also should be figured out through conversation, in my opinion. That's just my approach, but we don't have to get into a massive debate over.
I like
over
talking
that.
about it. I mean, I think it's a good
Yeah,
conversation.
no. I think it is, but I guess the reason
Because it's important.
it's always best when there's one agreed goal and mindset. Is my opinion.
And it's also best.
And you have
to employ a guy to make those decisions, not have him have these trickle down to where he has to rely on these guys to make these players look good.
This sort of thing is decided in the interview process. I'm sure there are GMs out there who feel this way, that the coach shouldn't have a say, and maybe if they are hiring a coach, they'll find someone who says, I'm not interested in interfering with your draft picks. I will accept whoever you draft. I'll still give you some feedback, but I'll accept whoever you draft. I just want to do my job and coach the team. But I'm also sure there's the opposite, and I'm sure those GMs and coaches find each other. As to what works the best, we don't know every coach GM's relationship with each other. I'm sure there's someone who's looked up into all of it that perhaps has this all figured out. But my guess would be that the coaches and the GMs that are, I guess, on the same page and are constantly going back and forth with each other would be the ones that are the best. But I'm interested to know Nick Sirianni and Howie Roseman's relationship now that
we already know what it is. We already know what it is because this today for every Eagles head coach outside of Andy Reid, they're yes men.
Yeah.
Because that's all Howie Roseman, what he's doing. He's the puppet master. And that's just how it is. And that's what the Doug Peterson issues, that's what it stemmed from. He got fired like a year or two after winning a Super Bowl because he didn't agree with Howie Roseman.
Yeah.
But to tie this back to like Dallas in this draft philosophy thing, because that's what we rely on the most. Like a lot of the talk of this year, it's like for Matt Lafleur, like we need to draft players to fit Matt Lafleur's system, and Matt Lafleur is going to have an input on these players. The year prior to Mike Zimmer likes these guys, so we draft players. It's just you end up drafting players that fit other people's system that you're not guaranteed to be there. That's when you fire, like when you say, like for Dallas, they have three different defensive coordinators, three different defensive coordinators who had input on the draft. So we have globs of players that don't fit the current team and what the current team is trying to do. You know what I'm saying? Where if you're a GM and you're drafting for your defense, you have an idea of what the defense is going to be from a year-to-year basis, and you have an idea of how to scout talent, all that. And like with Dallas, Will McClay is basically our general manager. He's basically our GM, but his title is like VP, like vice president of player personnel. But he's the guy that runs our drafts, and I feel like when he's just left alone, he ends up having great drafts. And look at his history in Dallas, outside of like I guess the 2023 draft, and then certain parts of like recent drafts, it's been great. But then you hear now how these coaches are having input and stuff, and it's just a mess. I feel like it gets messy when you rely on coaches. That's what my biggest point.
Well, yeah, and I think the reason is the biggest truth behind what you're saying is when there's too many voices, you don't have a vision. If worst comes to worst, I do want my GM being the only one making the decisions because too much interference from different coaches. You're putting your faith in the GM to organize all that in his brain, decide what's best, how he wants to, take input, how seriously he wants to take it. And then you have no vision because it's none of the coach's individual vision. It's not the GM's vision and there's no plan. So what I would say is if you can't have everyone on the same page, then yes, your GM should be the only one making those decisions. And I'll agree with that. But, maybe for dysfunctional organizations, it's not possible, but you should always strive, in my opinion, to have everyone on that, like Robert Baratheon. What's the bigger number, 5 or 1? And he says 1, not 5 ideas, not 5 armies, 1 army behind 1 man and 1 purpose. And that's how you win.
And nobody does that better than Howie Roseman.
You're right.
He is the only guy making decisions there. He's not relying on your coaches.
Maybe you're right about that. I'll have to dive into that a little bit this week and
Tyler Roseman, he's a god.
yeah,
He always has been.
he's the god of GMs. But speaking of
Also, one more final thing on this, just to
okay,
close it up. Like, I feel like from a fan perspective, like you'll watch a player for like their first year, and I feel like you could probably relate to this, and you could see the expectations, and you could see them play well, and then it's like you change your head coach, you change your offensive coordinator, you change your defensive coordinator, then you just see a huge fall off, and this player doesn't even play anymore, or they're just not the same player. I feel like there's a lot of examples in that for Dallas.
yeah,
The number one guy in my mind is Maris Liufau, a linebacker. Mike Zimmer loved. He was a smart guy. He had a great rookie year, and then this year he can't even go on the field. It's just all messed up. But like that's kind of my worry when it comes to the Giants. And you already fired Daboll, and then it's a Jackson Dart thing, and that's kind of where that's my fear with that whole scenario with this because how is it different than when you hired Daboll or whoever you hired for Daniel Jones? It's just a process being repeated in a
yeah,
sense.
I would be worried about, Dart and, is he going to be able to relate and learn under a new coach? I think he will be able to, but it's definitely a valid concern. My biggest example is Deontay Banks after Martindale left. He was really
Yes.
sticky in man coverage, and the fact he couldn't get his head around wasn't as big of a deal when you're already kind of in coverage on the guy. When you're trying to do that right after you're kind of a half step behind because you're late on your zone coverage assignment, instead of just following someone, which is much more like natural, which an athlete like him can do. It just all fell apart with Banks. And like I said, we got a very opportune kick return touchdown by him today to show off that athleticism. So just, yeah, very, yeah, it's when you have a rotating door, it's not usually good for anyone, but sometimes, in my opinion, you need a clean slate, especially if you know it's not the answer. You got to move on to something else that might be. So
to bring to bring this back to the NFC North, like another example of this late bloomer though is Nashawn Wright. He was drafted in Dallas, 99th overall pick, third round. Al Harris was our defensive backs coach. He's now in Chicago. Nashawn Wright follows him, and then we see him blossom into. He should have been a Pro Bowler this year. I think he had like 6 interceptions or something, but I think he got snubbed because the Eagles got two. They got fucking
yeah.
DeGene in a Pro Bowl somehow.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, but so
exciting whites.
back to the Bears though, like they've been a I feel like they had the talent and they set all this up with like we've seen Ryan Poles last few years. It felt successful, like his player acquisition, like from front, and they just didn't play well. And now to see Ben Johnson bringing the best out of all these players has been great. Plus, you could easily what was the biggest thing the Bears did? They invested in their O-line this offseason. They picked up
Yeah.
the whole interior O-line is brand new. They like paid a premium price. They made trades, and this is what they reaped the rewards of building their line. That's how I feel about where
I,
they're at now.
I was going to counter kind of what you were saying about Howie Roseman with Ben Johnson and say what we felt in the Bears offseason really felt like Ben Johnson's plan. And that was his
No.
one vision that he had because Ryan Poles had been there for years and he had opportunities to bring in offensive linemen. And he didn't do it really that substantially until Ben Johnson got there. And then you look at the draft, Colston Loveland in the first round. You got Kyle Monangai late, but he got his running back value. And it just felt like, a lot of picks that were kind of similar to some of the Detroit picks that felt really odd at the time. But, they start to kind of flourish and age well over time. And, yeah, it's just kind of the other end of the coin. And I feel like Ben Johnson has to be receiving most of the credit for the Bears' success because I feel like a lot of the players that they got were his babies. Luther Burden, as his guy, his maybe Amon Ra for the Bears. It's
I,
it's mostly credit to him. I mean, Ryan Poles has been kind of
Ryan
messy.
Poles though is the only way they're here now though is what Ryan Poles has put together because we've seen like they've had a lot of offseason hype for years now with their drafts like the year prior that like the only way they got Caleb Williams was because they traded out of the number one pick the year prior.
Yeah, and it was
And
a
they
great move. It was.
yeah, and who did that?
It was him, but
Who
you
did
got to
that?
be really
Who were the
bad.
players?
You got to be
Who were
really
their players?
bad to get the number one overall pick and then to finish in the top 10 again or top
That was
11.
early on. That was early on in his tenure though, because they got Darnell
Yeah.
Wright. I think the year they traded back, in the year prior they landed Caleb
Yeah,
Williams,
that was
and
the
then
one.
they also got Roma Dunze 10th overall. Like,
Yeah.
and those guys have been highly successful
Then
so
they
far.
also took like a punter though in like the fourth. That was
And
kind
the
of
punters,
crazy.
one of the best punters in the league, right?
Maybe, but I think it's time we move on from the NFC North.
Lions. We didn't really talk about the
Oh
Lions.
yeah, we didn't even talk about the Lions. We got to talk about the Lions, and
And the Vikings.
it's just so embarrassing for the Lions now swept by JJ Nine McCarthy and Max Brosmer for the Vikings. And just kind of to me it was a superior coaching staff that really, showed why the Vikings, are going to age better over time because the Lions lost their two coordinators. Jared Goff outside in the cold, all the turnovers, a statue, couldn't figure it out against the Brian Flores defense. And it seemed like the Lions had not a lot of creativity on offense and not enough answers to move the ball. And they allowed themselves to lose to Max Brosmer. And they're now 8-8 on the season. They've not played well in the division. And it seems like without Ben Johnson and without Aaron Glenn, what was initially a bridge quarterback in Jared Goff, that the Lions run over the past couple years is kind of coming to an end with the emergence of the Bears and, the future that the Packers have. And, the Vikings
Future? What future?
The Packers have a future. They're going to be contenders next year with Micah. Let me finish the statement.
Wouldn't the Lions be in this? You couldn't say the same thing about them. They've had more success than the Packers have.
The Packers still have they still have all their coaches though.
And so do the Lions.
The Lions didn't lose to the Packers. Or the Packers.
Dan Campbell's there still.
The Packers and Lions lost to the same team in the playoffs. But I just wanted to say the Vikings also, maybe JJ 9 McCarthy might not be so bad. I mean, he did look a little better down the end of the season. But either way, the Vikings just seemingly with a brighter future, at least further along in, taking those critical steps to finding your quarterback, whether it is McCarthy or you have to bring someone in. And then I just feel, well, if they're winning this game, when the Lions have Jared Goff,
you haven't acknowledged why they're winning, though.
Well, their defense.
Yes, and who's their defensive coordinator?
Brian Flores.
Yes.
Yeah. I said
That's
coaching.
The reason why they're winning.
I said the Vikings won because of coaching staff.
I think he's the number one. I feel like he should be the number one head coaching target. Bring Brian Flores in.
He should.
Especially
and the Giants aren't going to get him.
Especially with how the Dolphin stuff has aged, just how correct he knew right away Tua wasn't that guy.
He did.
And I find that hilarious looking back at it. And then how much he took the scrutiny and all that stuff, and now he's just been great anywhere he's been. So that's the guy I would want to bring in. I want him to be my defensive coordinator because the Vikings in Seattle to me are on the same level of like just how funky they like their systems that they run and how different it is compared to the rest of the league.
They're different systems, but they are the funkiest in the league. And I feel like Flores almost doesn't even have many clones. Even though he is, I believe, like a kind of remnant of the Patriots and Bill Belichick and kind of what Vrabel does, but he kind of has his own flavor where he takes like the multiple fronts and, the versatile linebackers, moving them all over the place, blitzing, faking blitz, and then not blitzing and all that kind of stuff, crazy coverages, whereas Mike Mack has that sort of, individual assignment per defensive player or group like defensive line and linebackers, and it really is like a whole different way to describe defensive coverages and blitzes and stuff, and it's a whole lot for offensive quarterbacks to get used to. But I think Flores should be the number one head coaching candidate. I think the Dolphins failed him. They tried to corrupt him and get him to tank, and he didn't want to do that. You said it with Tua, he didn't want to commit to him, and the Dolphins did. And I don't know who outside the Giants is going to be in the front running spot, but he could also just stay with the Vikings.
What if his contract's expired? What if Green Bay brought him in to change their defense?
That would be pretty insane if they did do that. That would be an insane cop. And I think Brian Flores, if he wants to win a Super Bowl, probably should go coach for the Packers. Or,
That's my best fit going into the offseason. It would be like the same thing of taking Caleb, taking Ben Johnson. Imagine taking Brian Flores from the Vikings.
They got to get in on this. And that'll hurt the Vikings tremendously and every other team in the division. And the Vikings without Brian Flores, I mean,
it'd be disgusting.
They gotta figure out if McCarthy's the guy very soon.
That's why I was so confused when you said their future was brighter than Detroit. I was just like, whoa, This guy
Because
could be one.
I'll tell you why, because that does sound weird, but I'll tell you what I mean by that, and that's the fact that Detroit has already hit their ceiling, in my opinion, which means they're only in for a decline
Mm.
of disappointing seasons where they don't win the Super Bowl moving forward. And and then in hindsight, you're gonna say, well, if Goff wasn't the guy and we already hit our ceiling, I kind of wish we hit the reset button. We don't have
I
any of
wasn't
our
gonna say
coaches figured out right now. We're not sure about Jared Goff, and this defense is completely expiring, and we've got a young offensive nucleus that we need to take advantage of. So we kind of need to restart.
I
Now
think they just need to get the right offensive coordinator in there, and they'll be back to being the Lions. I think because they had their bad offense trying to replace Ben Johnson in house, I believe. I feel like they replaced both their coordinators in house, and that was just a massive mistake.
Yeah,
Trying to copy their previous regimen. I just think they need to find something fresh, and they have a lot of talent there that's not going. Like, it's locked up. Like the star talent that they have is pretty much under team control. So I don't see this window closing. I just think they need to hit a. They need to do a What do you call it? It's not a reset. It's a retool or whatever.
they need to reload.
Reload. Yeah, they need to
Well,
reload.
well, I'll tell you this. I don't think they're not going to be competitive. I think their window is closed. I think they missed their shot.
I don't know.
I
I think that's
I think
premature.
when you had Amon Ra on,
They still
without a
have them.
contract, Penei Sewell while they were on the rookie contracts, they're playing
We'll have
that
another rookie.
49ers team. That was their opportunity, and Dan Campbell said in that post-game interview, he kind of let it slip, and he sort of backpedaled, but he said that might have been our only shot. And I think he really meant
Well,
that.
it's
He
a lot of
really
people feel that
knew.
way.
He knew we're not going to be able to keep Ben Johnson. If it should have been last year, if they were going to do it and they couldn't do it with the injuries, they completely choked versus the Commanders. And I feel like I would rather be in a position where I'm trying to find a new quarterback than kind of hopelessly missing out on the Super Bowl because my quarterback's limited or we can't find the coach, whatever it may be. You got to guarantee it's all going to go right, and they had that once and they couldn't make the most of it. But it is time that we move on to
This brings